Okay, so here we are in the shop. I dropped my trailer, and I have a few things I need to say. And I'm gonna say this before we get into this whole truck analysis thing. All right, so I'm gonna make my recommendation. Just kind of more minimum requirements to do this heavy haul. Now, let's just say, for some reason, at level 4, you got yourself a truck. Of course, that would be a day cab truck. I didn't become an owner op until I was level 10, so I could get a sleeper. But say you became an owner op with a day cab, that means you can only have access. Well, actually, 13 speed is unlocked at level 4. I like the 13 speed. So you could have the 13 speed transmission, and also the minimum would be this 425 ISX 12 with 1650 torque. You also unlock the pack car, but that's less torque, so forget about that. And honestly, I would go at that torque level. I would go with the ISX 15 450. Not that the horsepower matters, but then you have more displacement to do that job, because 425 is actually the top rating of the ISX 12. And that little engine's going to have to give all it has for a long time to get that big load moving. So that engine at level 4, like I was saying, I think this is unlocked at like level 6. I'm not 100% sure though. So the 4 1/4 ISX 12, the 13 speed, and the 13 speed, and honestly a 10 speed. Well, let's get into that in a minute. And you can also get a 6x4 chassis at level 3, or is it level 4? I'm not 100% sure now, but I think you can also get a 6x4 at level 4. And then you're pretty much set. You have a 10 or a 13 speed transmission with a little bit more horsepower and torque to pull the load, and you should be in fine shape. That should be okay as a kind of a starter truck. Now, let's kind of go into this situation, what I was running here. Let's imagine this is your highway truck. You just mostly pull normal cargo. Remember, this is in game. So you have a 6x2 chassis, and say you don't run fast and you don't need a lot of horsepower, so you have whatever engine. I really don't like to use anything. Honestly, 1650 is still too small for me. It has to be, 1550 is still too small. So, in my opinion, you have to have at least 1650 torque. That's the absolute bottom end. So let's just say you had the ISX 12, so you have smaller displacement for better fuel efficiency and 1650 torque rating. Now, let's say you have a 10 speed with, that's a direct 10 speed, so you don't have an overdrive, which means you're getting more power to the ground and not wasting it inside the transmission, with 285 differentials. Or let's even just say you had the same automatic that I was using. Now, this presents some challenges. And those challenges are, as you saw, if you had to stop on an on-ramp. The 6-speed, and I'm sure any other transmission, I've tested it out with a couple different ones, the 6-speed is for certainly the worst. I thought perhaps this 10-speed, because you got 264s, but it doesn't matter. The 6-speed has the absolute worst low gear to pull heavy weight. And so what you'd have to do is, say you found this really good load and it's exactly where you needed to go, and it's paying really well, and you decide, okay, we're going to take it. If you had the 6-speed, a lower horsepower engine, and a 6x2, basically what you would have to do is you just have to make sure to not be afraid of RPMs. You're going to have to wind this thing out to make the gears with such few gears. But say you come up to an on-ramp and there are vehicles on it, and it's the uphill on-ramp, you're going to have to stop down on the flat highway and wait for everybody to clear out, and then build just a little bit of speed, get it up into the RPMs, get going as fast as you can, because I even tested it. If you're just going slow, if you're going just a little bit too slow and you have your pedal to the metal, you'll actually begin to spin and lose speed and get in that same situation. So you want to have more speed. I actually tested it with an 18 speed. So if you're in the lowest gear, I'm not sure what RPM it was, but I was going too slow and I began to spin. But let's say you have a 6-speed, you just make sure you have enough RPM and speed to go up that hill and pull up as far as you can to the road to the intersection without blocking the traffic, and then pull out onto the road you need to go, or whatever. And then you'll just have to take a good look up ahead. What's happening next? Is there an on-ramp? Are there cars on the on-ramp? And you'll have to think ahead like that. It'll still work. You can make it work. Now, if you want to avoid that, 6x4 is the way to go. You can unlock that, I believe, at level 4. And I just like 6x4 better. And that should do the job. That should alleviate that problem. Now, if you want to talk about in real life, yes. You don't haul this kind of cargo without having a truck spec'd for it. And I can imagine if somebody had a load and he called his friend, hey, I really need another tractor to do this. Could you help me out? Well, I could imagine somebody that had a good, let's say, 550 CAD or 1850 torque engine with a 13 speed, of course 6x4. Well, let's not get into the whole 6x2 versus 6x4 in real life. Now, like I said, if you were to do this in real life, had a decent engine, for sure a 13 speed, preferably an 18 speed, good rear ends, 350, probably nothing higher than a 355. You'd have to have, I think that actually is 355 is, I think, the highest ratio in the game. Everything else is much lower. You're talking 264s, all these other ones you've never heard of before. So, 355s or 370s, 390s, to where you can get the load going in the low gears. American Truck Simulator has really, I'm not sure what to say, but they've really reduced the effects of letting the clutch out. Because you can take off in very high gears and it just takes it. Whereas in real life, you generally would need a little bit lower of a gear, and you can't really let it, or you don't want to let it slip that long. Not to mention, your truck is going to begin to hop, and you have torque twist and a whole bunch of other things that you really don't want to happen, that do happen if you're taking off in too high of a gear. So like I was saying, in real life, you generally don't see people who are not set up to do heavy haul doing this kind of thing. I mean, you might see something like that, somebody with maybe an 1850 or 1650 torque engine, and possibly, really you need a 13 speed, but it's possible a 10 speed. I've seen some stuff like, not this big stuff, but a heavier bulldozer, maybe grossing 95,000 pounds, the whole tractor and trailer, done with a 1650 torque and 10 speed. But all that stuff aside, the first thing I think I should address, yes, because of game engine, if you ask me, game engine problems, you can, 6x4 is actually necessary, or at least preferred, to do heavy haul work. And that automatically jumps way up your heavy cargo, because now you don't have the risk of burning out if you're taking off on an incline, because that would totally happen in real life. But the thing is, does not help your uneven terrain at all. Okay, look, I did not notice it until right now, that it is actually highlighting your differential ratio, first gear ratio, and gears count. Oh, and axle count as well. Uneven terrain, axle count, not powered axle count. Okay, so when somebody says uneven terrain to me, that means off-road or a very bumpy surface where you could get, basically off-road, where you could get a bumpy surface, a wheel spin, and you could, your wheels could begin spinning themselves in. Okay, post-narration. I was explaining stuff that didn't make sense here, so you're going to see me wave the mouse around, and it's not going to make a whole lot of sense. Basically, what I'm trying to say is, with a 6x2 and the fully locking differential, like it has in game, you only have that small patch of traction. Now, say you're driving in sand or whatever, and you have a 6x4, you have a longer area to make it through that small patch of extra bad stuff, extra sandy, extra low traction. Whereas if you only have a 6x2, you only have that small area. I'm not sure if it helps, but I'd like to maybe use the analogy of like a tank track or a track on a bulldozer that gives you, it's almost like an average where you can have small spots of bad traction, but you have such a long overall area that has traction or more contact patches that you have a better chance even without a differential lock. Now if SCS does have 3 or 4-way locking differentials, now that would be absolutely great, and then you'd have a far superior 3 or 4-way locker 6x4 versus a regular full locking 6x2. So that's what's wrong with this whole uneven terrain thing. You need to have more powered axles and more differential locks for better uneven terrain. And I'm not sure why they even put the whole axle count thing there, because they're all 6x somethings. They don't have any single axles that I've seen yet. Of course, maybe we'll get some single axles or some heavy hauls, maybe 8x6 or 8x4. We will see. So that's the first thing, the whole uneven terrain thing. That's what I consider ridiculous. That's not realistic at all. Now, hills traversal. I don't think that the chassis has anything to do with it. We'll just leave this whole 6x4 on there. And as you saw, that really brings up the heavy cargo, and I already mentioned why that is for the whole not spinning. But yeah, that's ridiculous. Okay, now the whole engines. I mean, I could say whatnot. I really disagree with this whole being better at normal cargo if it has less horsepower. You know what, by the way, I looked up the specs for this engine, the ISX-12, and they actually make a 330 with this torque. Yeah, so I think they also might have had a 370 that was actually, well, heck, I'm really not sure if they had a 370 that was more respectable. Let's not get into that. I think having a more solid engine is a very important thing for all kinds of cargo. I like how it just barely affects the hill traversal too. Just barely. Let's just go straight for the big 600. But actually that 550 was supposed to be like middle ground, huh? Alright, we'll do this one, just for the sake of I'm not sure what. Okay, here is where we run into some serious problems. Right now, of course, the 6-speed, 10-speed you can get right from the start. And look very closely at that heavy cargo. Well, you know what? That's actually, I went from the worst to something else. Okay, let's look at the 10-speed. And for some reason, that nerfs the normal cargo. I have no idea why. I guess the 6-speed autos are supposed to be great, but who cares? Now, 10-speed direct is apparently great for hauling heavy cargo. You really... In the game, it doesn't matter that much. In real life, it's much more important to have the ability to split the gears like a 13 or an 18-speed. In the game, you can make it work even with a 6, like I mentioned. But 10-speed is much better. You have a more uniform difference between the gears. That's great. Now, a 13-speed, look at what happens to the heavy cargo. It goes ever so slightly down. Now, I will give it a tiny little bit of credit because it's doing the, it's doing the first gear ratio along with the differential ratio. I actually did the math, and these are not all that different. Well, you know what, tell you what, let me give you an exact number here. Basically, I think they're looking just too closely at just the first gear ratio. Here you have 285s, and here you have 355s. Yes, the 10-speed, I did the math, has slightly lower final drive ratio with the transmission and the differential. However, it's not a very big difference at all. And once again, you need that 13 or 18 speed to be able to split the gears and keep the engine in the power band while hauling such heavy weight. So that's also totally ridiculous. The 10 speed is really not good for hauling heavy cargo. In game, like I said, it works better. but I think there's some flawed logic there. The benefit you get from the ability to split gears is much more than you get from that ever so slightly lower bottom end gear from the 10 speed. Alright, so you have better maneuverability. I'm not sure what... Okay, you know what, let's look. Okay, so apparently the gears count has a lot to do with maneuverability. Basically, they're saying more granular control, like I'm constantly talking about, better, so where you can split the gears. I don't think that should be in the maneuverability thing at all. That should be purely wheelbase and steering angle, how tight your wheels can turn. Also, visibility I think should be in there, like an aero truck versus a long nose. So forget about that. Now, hills traversal. Apparently a 13 speed is worse at traversing hills, which is also totally ridiculous. What is this thing going by? Engine torque, differential ratio. Okay, the retarder is irrelevant. And once again, the first gear ratio. So that's obviously why they're looking too closely at the whole first gear ratio when a 13 speed is far, far superior, because you're going to have to go up a hill somewhere with a heavy load and split that gear to where you can keep the engine closer in the power band instead of grabbing that big full gear and going up that hill. You're going to lose speed, and now you're dragging it up from a much lower RPM than you would like to be at, and also winding it out to a higher RPM than you would like to. So a 13 speed is much better at hills traversal. That's also bogus. Uneven terrain, I'm not sure why that moves. What is this again? I guess they're looking at the gears count. Now, that doesn't really matter in a 13, but in an 18 speed, it does. Let's compare the 13 and the 18. Of course, it's better at heavy cargo, and the reason for that is... Wait, I'm clicking the wrong thing here. So 13 speed versus 18 speed. Maneuverability is affected, so we're not going to think about that. Apparently, it's better at normal cargo. I have no idea at all why an 18 would be better at normal cargo than 13 speed. Of course, you got more gear ratios, but those are irrelevant. Like I was saying, 10 speed you can make it work, and in the lower gears you do not need to split the low gears like you can with 18 speed unless you're hauling that heavy cargo or going up a very steep hill with a heavy load, and you want to split that gear to where the drop is less and you don't lose so much speed. Also, the uneven terrain can be affected slightly by an 18 speed versus 13 speed. I'm not sure if that much, but the reason for that is also, say the ground is soft, as soon as you let off the throttle, the truck slows down a lot. So, what you do is you, instead of grabbing a full gear, you just split that gear and you have a slightly higher speed. You can have you have that half gear, and you can get up a little bit more speed and split the gear again and accelerate that way and not have to lose all this speed and maybe miss the gear and stop completely and risk getting stuck. Whereas you can also, in real life, you can hit the Jake brakes, put it on a low stage, and when you grab the next gear, it'll pull the RPMs back real quick. That's good, but 18 speed is good for that. That way you can build a little bit more speed in the low end in soft ground. Also, the 18 speed, if we look back here at hills traversal, is slightly better, but that's only when you're talking about some seriously heavy loads and steep hills where you're going to need to split gears in the low end. When they say hills traversal, I automatically think going down the highway and going up and down grades, which is much better to have an 18 or 13 speed versus a 10. And I like the 18 speed anyways. It's just an extension to a 13 in my mind. I think all the stats that it gives it here could be excessive, but needless to say, I still like the 13 speed more. the maneuverability, like I said, we need to ignore that. And for some reason, it's better at normal cargo. Don't know what's up with that. 10 speed versus 13 or the 18. Well, let's not leave the 18 out of this, but is, in my mind, totally ridiculous. 10 speed should not be drop off like that for normal cargo. It should actually be, it's actually the norm these days. Most trucks that still have manual transmissions have 10 speeds because they're easy to operate. You don't have to think about splitting gears or any of that stuff. And generally, I say generally here, the engines can handle the drop if you're not doing extreme stuff like doing off-roading or hauling very heavy cargo. If hauling normal 80,000 pounds load, you can get by with a 10 speed. It's still much better to have a 13 or an 18. That way you do have the more adjustability. And retarder, yes, this makes sense to have that low. Oh, and it's magically better for normal cargo as well because simply put it here, hills traversal, yes, it's better to where you can slow yourself down going down a grade. So that makes better for hill traversal and better for heavy cargo. Why it's so much better for normal cargo, I'm not sure, because those loads, I mean, of course it's better to have a retarder, but those loads are not that heavy. It's not going to be that big of a deal. Which actually brings me back to this whole thing about hauling heavy cargo in a more normal spec truck. If you're get close to a grade, or say going over the top, just don't start cooking it right away. Just hit your jake brake, see, okay, can the jake brake hold this? Can it not? And just find the speed at which your jake brakes can hold it. Here, and actually in the US, it's actually a rarity. It's very rare to find a truck that has some kind of retarder, not just straight jake brakes. Heavy haulers, now this may have changed, but for a long time, all they had was jake brakes. They'd go down the hills with heavy weight or steep mountains, whatever, you name it. They go down there very slowly with the jake brakes roaring to keep the load under control. Of course, it's slightly better to have retarder. Well, it's much better to have a retarder, but once again, I think this is really overdoing it. Your jake brakes, as long as you put at least a little bit of thought into it, will be just fine. And of course, 18, and at the end of the day, all this math is just, it's great for somebody who perhaps doesn't know these things, and I guess that's why I'm making this whole rant and whatnot, trying to educate just a little bit. And the math behind it is just trying to help you make a slightly more informed decision in case you don't understand some of these things. I just really dislike the way it puts it all together. So let's just try and make the best heavy haul truck real quick here. Of course, you're going to want the big 600 horsepower. Okay, now it's automatically as good as it can get. Best at hill traversal. And apparently it sucks for normal cargo because you don't need horsepower. No, you can just get along with any wimpy truck. I guess you can find whatever your favorite balance is. Those are exactly the same. Whatever your favorite balance of engine and okay, that's apparently bad at normal cargo, which is once again bogus. You can find whatever is best for you. Let's get a 6x2. That'll probably nerf it back into there. You can find whatever is your favorite balance of horsepower, gear ratios, and whatnot to make your perfect truck to do the job. I, however, prefer high horsepower, lots of gears. You don't have to use the gears if you don't want to. You don't have to use a retarder if you don't want to. You don't have to use the horsepower if you don't want to, at least in real life, or if you have a steering wheel set up to where you don't have to mash your foot all the way to the floor all the time. That's just my 2 cents. I am going to turn this off and never look back unless I'm curious what kind of ridiculousness it has to say. I know that was a long rant. I hope you guys learned something, and I hope you enjoyed this. If you did, please let me know by leaving a like or in the comments or whatever. It's all your choice, no pressure. So, until next time, hopefully, when I have more nice things to say, have a good one.